she doesn't have
She
any.
doesn't have it.
Would you write it on there
Yeah,
for me and
there's
I'll
the
get it
cloud
to her?
lifting, and just get all that money.
We just approved
They were
the
amazing.
usual claims
I
in
know
the
we did.
budget last night.
And this doesn't do them justice.
It was in the packet, so you can look at it.
Bring it back from ball practice or whatever. That's just how we work around.
Now we can call it to order.
Thank you, Rod. I'll make sure she does it.
We'll start out with public body comment. Any public body comments?
I guess since you're looking at me, yes, I'll have one short comment that I would like to encourage. Your county chairman has made several points over the last year of the importance of a contract, and the importance of honoring a contract. Your budget is a contract with the people, and the restrictions on amending that budget are very restrict, and there's a purpose behind that. That way we don't continue to amend the budget in violation of the Budget Act. So I would urge that you focus on honoring the contract of the people, which is your budget. The other thing, I noticed that you have a second line item with $0 figure for a second state's attorney. I remind the board that the board sets the number of assistant state's attorneys. That has been set at 1. The board has never taken action to change that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other public comments? I guess none other? Okay. We'll start then. You guys can lead us into the presentation of the budget.
All right, hi, I am Dustin Hartman from Bellwether. I've met a lot of you, but not everyone, but good to see everyone here. This is my associate Jake. He's going to be running us through some slides we have prepared, as well as I want to go through the entire budget to get the opinion of the board and kind of help with direction on where we go with this budget, since it is the Shelby County budget, not the Bellwether budget, so we want to make sure that we're working with you to put forth your budget. So we did get a draft budget out. We have gone through many drafts on this. The process in the first year is very developmental. So there are a lot of growing pains in the first year. We've received a lot of good response from the department heads. They've worked really well with us. We're going to work on developing those relationships to understand the process. So during the packet return, so we get all of the information in a large dump when we start creating a budget. So previous year's budgets, actual numbers, and we get all this information, we put it into our format. We go ahead and then we put forth chunks of that. So we break that out into who's responsible for what piece of that budget. We break that out into what we call packets. So this is when we send each one of these packets out to the department heads. Here's what we feel you are responsible for in this budget. Tell us if there's anything else that you are aware of that you oversee in this budget. So we break up every line and start communicating with department heads at that time. So ideally, this is when we collect back all of the information from the department heads. This is where we're developing those relationships and understanding who gets what. We don't necessarily get all of that information, and that's where we kind of run into some baseline issues of we need to understand who gets what and where it comes in. So we've gone through more drafts than what we typically would by, okay, we think we have it, and then more information trickles in, and so we almost get daily emails to update this, where we want to be a month further down the road from next year in this process. We can also talk about next year if we want to do 2 budgets, if we want to align you with a fiscal year of December instead of September. We can do 2 budgets next year and do a 3-year budget, and then another budget that would cover you for an entire 12-month period. So we can also discuss that of doing 2 budgets next year in order to realign your fiscal year. So that's another process that we can discuss later down the road. So at this point, we do feel like we have a solid budget. We've worked hard to come up with a way to get it balanced. So if you could give me a slide to show. So previous years, Shelby County has been cutting into reserves by passing these. So I hear a lot of, it doesn't necessarily turn out this way, and we try to be more accurate with our projections on our numbers. But in past years, the improved expenses have significantly outweighed the revenues. So this year, we've worked really hard to identify revenues that can balance out the expenses. So we believe at this point, we do have a stronghold on a balanced budget and have a proposed way to where we can present a balanced budget to pass in Shelby County. All right, so next slide. So here's specifically what this looks like. This actually, I've received 4 emails, like I said, where I'm continually receiving it. So this number is actually even updated since this slide's been created. So let's jump into the budget then. Let's transition into the budget. I want to go through this to understand. I did not get a lot of feedback from the board when we send it out. Typically, I get a lot of housekeeping emails of, hey, on line 257, I realize you misspelled this, or there's a misalignment in this. I get some of those from the board. I didn't get a whole lot of that. So I just want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of the budget as a whole. So today I want to take the opportunity to go through the whole budget so I know that you've seen it.
Dustin,
Yes.
so on the 23 budget, that number includes the ARPA allocation. So the big jump in both expense and revenue is the ARPA money coming in and the ARPA money going out. So if you remove that, it's a lot more comparable year over year.
So the first section when we go into the budget is going to be the general fund. That's where we spend the bulk amount of our time. We start by breaking out revenues. Can you transition into you're still up here on the PowerPoint slide. So our first section is going to cover revenues from the general fund, which will include that large transfer from the ARPA fund into the general fund. Okay, so scroll down a little bit. So here's a lot. Stop right here. Here's a good example of in year one there's growing issues. So there's ways that certain lines were identified where they were budgeted as they were all pooled and then put into the budget versus them broken out and tracked individually. So in previous years, some of these line items were just pooled and then said, we're going to get a total amount of this. So we're trying to break those out into, let's get these into smaller pieces so we can truly understand when PPRT is not trending to where it should be, or a specific line where we can say, this is the problem and this is an area that we need to deal with. So when we can pull those out individually, it's easier for tracking and it's better to understand the picture as you look at it individualized. All right, scroll down.
Did all of the members get the draft budget in your packet? So you got one in
You mean
it?
this? Yeah, I got like
you've
3
got
of them
this,
in the
okay.
last
Just making
10
sure.
days.
Yeah. Well, I got it.
They joked this morning that they're on version 300.
Yeah,
I did not get it.
374. Go ahead and give me a bottom line of revenues here. So our bottom line will cover, so here's a good section of a few transfer lines were added in, including the ARPA. So this $750,000 is significantly going to impact the revenue numbers for the general fund, as Bruce was saying. But this is reflected in the expenses of the general fund through the MOUs and the additional costs to the audit and different items that have identified for spending through ARPA. So we specifically identified $750,000 for this. I continue to get small adjustments to labor calculations in the MOU for the courthouse as well that were identified. So This actually does not include the cost of the courthouse MOU. It does include the increase to the sheriff's labor items. So that is calculated due to the increase in sheriff labor, but does not include the increase to the courthouse labor. So if the courthouse labor is to be supported by ARPA, which is a temporary revenue, we won't have that after another year or 2 years, depending on how the spending goes. So this is a temporary revenue, but the expenses of an increase will continue beyond that. So that's something that's keep in mind. We will get into a little bit of the levy. I'm not going to go completely into the levy today, but I will touch on how to disperse an increased levy, because the levy is double the increase that it was last year because of the cost of living. So I'll continue to get into that as we go. Any questions on revenue from the board? No? All right, let's keep going. So the next section of our budget is a quick breakdown on departments in the budget. So this is a oversimplification of the county board, the ROE. We'll get into specifics. We're going to go through the whole thing. So go ahead and go down to the first department. All right, so when we look at this, we like to look at the bottom line. We do need to get into individual line items, but the county is a retail county, so we know that we're limited in the amount of growth. So we do try to identify, okay, the property tax is only going to be allowed to grow according to the CPI. CPI this year is luckily over 5%, but you're stuck at 5%. So never more than 5% over your previous year's extension, often calculated by the CPI, which is pretty standardly around 2% depending on the so a 2% increase is typically where we like to see a section of the budget, because typically that's where the labor is going to grow. The bulk increases year to year that you're going to see increasing your budget is the cost of labor. Items like fuel, insurance, those things are going to increase, but people cost the most. So we typically see a 2% increase. If it's less than that, great. If it's more than that, we need to know why. So that's where we go with these packets. When we get them back, they start to set off red flags if anything is going over 2%. So we really start getting into it. So any questions? County board is growing by 2%. The increase, like we said, is typically in labor as it is here.
So maybe later on, we're going to talk about a potential added resource, and we'll circle back to this depending on the board's decision on where to place that resource, that it could become a new line item under the county board. And they're called many different things: county board assistants, internal auditors. So depending on your decision, we may add a new line item under the county board of new position and then title it later when we can run.
Something's wrong with your percent calculation on that one. Percentages off. So we received a request from the Regional Office of Education that increases their expense to $44,000. It's go down. This is another growing pain here from the county farm. County farm did not add an extra $130,000 worth of expenses. They just are reporting more at this point.
Is that 134, is that the projected profit for the farm? Is that what that is, or is that expenses?
That's a great question.
That is what we received as expenses for the county farm as the total expense. So
See, that bottom line didn't add in, that 30,000 is not in that total.
Can you drag that down?
And we do have current numbers today. They had a meeting yesterday, and we do have current numbers, and they are totally different than what she had.
Really?
That's what we need.
Yes.
All right,
So
so,
you have them?
Yeah, I'll give it to you right now if you're ready for it.
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. That's what Jake does, live changes.
Please speak up if you have items like this, and we'll drop them in right now.
And we need to get them into the same lines. The custom form has to come out there. Okay, not the, there's no place there for that.
Tell us what it is.
Where do you want the income at?
We'll,
Settle the crops.
so we have revenue up above. So go all the way up into revenues, and then we'll come back to that. I think it's, oops, stop. County farm income, 4700. All right, what are you anticipating for revenue from the county farm?
In the 22-23 year, $286,000.
286. Expenses.
The real estate taxes that are gonna be paid are gonna be $10,350. That'll be 3 payments.
General accounting section.
So that's
I'm glad you got that.
We're gonna take 216 times 200. So it's 126, 216. Oh, yeah, no, that's too far back. 126 for the 20. Totals, but the 10,000 is gonna stay the same, but the other two numbers are gonna change.
Oh, the hell, is that the health insurance?
Yeah.
Because our claims are so low.
to 540. Oh,
Because our claims are so low. It's self-insured.
That's for the,
And we have a buildup of 300,000 in that
that's for the,
to cover.
I don't know if they're gonna put health
which
insurance.
that's the farming, so
To be subject.
looks like the,
Because they're paying that for this.
looks like it'd be 105,950 for the top line. And then the custom farming, yeah, it was 216. $42,984 is an estimate for the custom farming.
Jake, why don't you make that? No, that's.
All right, we got it?
Yep, that should be very close, because they haven't set prices on the inputs yet, that's just a good estimate.
That is a significant increase in revenue, so that's nice.
Yeah, there will be 2 crops sold, and, so, yeah,
general county. So the group insurance is significantly going down due to the self-insured status of the county. So seeing a decrease into this typically flags something in my head of something's wrong because insurance is expensive and is always going up. But due to the claims going down, which was, I've heard multiple times explained as a COVID thing, of no one was going to the doctor because you were told to stay home unless it was an emergency, so I don't know if this is something that's gonna continue forward. There's also been
We
voice,
also lost 2 large claim employees that are no
Okay.
longer employed with the county, so that decreased quite a bit. Plus, we were able to build our reserves to 300,000, which when we first started this, we were actually in the hole, so there's those factors as well.
so there can be less expense due to the reserve being built and no longer having to build that. I know there's been discussion of going to bid and looking at new prices for this. So we'll continue to work with you as if that needs to be changed and it's going to significantly alter the organization of the county, we'll work with you to make sure that that reflects accurately. Let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit. The judge, I think, made a point on one of these. Can you scroll over a little bit?
Catchy.
So a significant increase to appoint counsel. The cost of the court system continues to go up. More cases are needing to be tried due to changes in Illinois legislation. Judges have been very good at communicating with us about the increase in cases that they're seeing due to the change in legislation, as well as the changes to cash bail. So they're anticipating a shift in the justice system as police reform becomes a thing, and items on that scale. So we did speak with the judge, and she advised us of a significant change to that. We'll watch that through the year, through our budget status reports and variance reports, to see if that's something that's going to be pushed. But she really anticipated at least $60,000 in that line, so that's an increased revenue.
Have we discussed variance reports before? So every month you get a financial report from the treasurer, but every 2 or 3 months, we'll pull information from the treasurer, and then we'll do a comparison of the estimate expense to the actual expense. And then if there's a difference, so let's play out an example and just use fuel right now. The budgeted amount for fuel is going to be below what the actual amount. So if we see that variance, then we contact that department head and say, this is what we see, this is what we think. Do you agree with that? And then you'll get a variance report to the board that says, line item, whatever number, fuel is up because of this. So, and we don't do those every month because you're getting financial reports from the treasurer, but when we see a variance, then they'll dig into it at the department level and provide you with a separate, sometimes it's often one page of this number's changed and this is why.
We do see that on our quarterly finance reports we get, variances.
Yeah, and we try to not dive into the weeds and pick the critical few that we're really watching. Because you can have a $1,000 line item that increases 100% and has minimal impact, or a $100,000 line item that increases 1% and has a significant impact. So some things we just don't care about. That's a hard way to say it, but you know.
We've had a variance report flag because the sheriff had deer run into their vehicle. Not when the deer are running, they don't even get in front of your vehicle; they hit the side of your vehicle. So we've had many, they just all hit at once. So we see it flags when we're getting all of these expenses at one time, and it's because deer are running right now, and the sheriff had to fix 4 vehicles at one time. They're all in the shop. So those kind of expenses get flagged in our variance reports as we run them through our algorithm. So we do track those type of things, and they're able to, okay, how far over is this gonna be? Is this something that you need to address? That's something we can bring to the board's attention. So another item to highlight in here is the audit expense. This is going to be highlighted an increase due to the increase in federal funds. That's a requirement by law. As you receive more federal funds, it triggers a line audit, single line audit, that is significantly more labor intensive for your auditor. So it comes with a much higher price tag. This is an ARPA approved expense even before they opened it up with the revenue company. So this is an approved ARPA expense that we have included in the revenue for ARPA transfer. We have a contingency here increasing, but we'll continue to discuss if that's something that needs to be addressed. Like Bruce said, if you're looking at possibly adding a position, that may be a way to address that as a temporary basis, semi-permanent, or however you want to address that. We will specifically address that a little later on.
So this first year, I'd like to see a lot more money in the contingency, because we have so many variables that we model with one variable, and all I have to do is change one assumption, the model changes. So if we put, it's like rat hole money, we're gonna tuck some money away for things that are unanticipated.
Can you fix that? Alright, so again, bulk increases that are going to take effect are in labor items. The MOU is reflected in this increase, I believe, and that's what we're seeing, a more significant increase to year over year versus last year's year over year. One thing I would like to see in future years is election broken out into its own. There are different rules on increasing your levy based on election is actually not included into these calculations, and it's hard to pull those numbers out as they're embedded into a different budget. As election cycles will go up and down based on 2 or however many elections there are every other year, that changes. So you're going to have that budget go up and down where the clerk's budget necessarily isn't going to. So it's harder to identify Jessica's changes in her specific budget as the election cycle changes itself. So pulling the election out on its own, again, this is a year of baseline and understanding your system, our system, and then we're able to do more changes as we move forward like that. But this year, we're just identifying these current year processes. So increases to election as anticipated, new legislation coming out of restricting on that, unfunded mandates as we'd love to see. All right. Any questions regarding the county clerk's budget?
So you're recommended in the future to put that in a separate department, but not currently?
I would
Not
like
a
to
separate
see,
department, but a separate category in our budget.
it doesn't need to be its own fund.
It would still be in the county clerk, or it would be in its own fund and separate?
It would still be in the general fund, but it would be organized out so we could track it separately. So it would be in a separate section. Same
Okay.
fund, separate section.
Right, okay.
scroll down, any other questions? Treasurer's budget, very similar as it includes the numbers for the MOU.
I think her salary might be just off by $20. It's $20 different than the other salaries. The others are all $330 and that was $350.
Go ahead and match yours to the one. Sorry, I just lost my book. Not that it actually changed it.
What do you have on site? I don't know.
Yeah, not much exciting in the treasurer's budget. Any questions in regards to that budget? No? Okay. Supervisor of assessor. Again, most of the increases throughout the labor items. Education budget will be higher to them as they have to keep their certifications, so that's as to be expected. Printing budget will fluctuate due to when you're on a flight year or when you're not on a flight year, so you're going to see different changes in the printing budget, and they're also starting to go down as counties move to paperless. So hopefully that continues to decrease.
Excuse me, on the printing, that is what we have to put in the paper, and by statute, we have to put it in a paper.
Yeah.
We
we're
can't
publishing.
do a website, we can't do online, any of that, it has to be printed until legislation changes that.
Right.
And then the other thing I had emailed, and I don't know if you got my email about the MOU, so my numbers for my deputy clerks changed a little.
Is that reflecting the $68,060?
Yes, sir. I can't see that.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Do you want me to zoom in and try to take like, just cut the percentages off?
It's fine. So there's, if you look at the letters across the top, there's more cells that we're using for calculations and review as we build this budget, and it's throwing off our percentages. So these percentages may not reflect, it's because of the hidden cells that this is actually like 10 cells long, not 3. So I apologize for the percentages.
Maybe see that.
Any questions about the supervisor of assessor?
Where do you stand on commercial assessment? Do you feel like you're up to date on commercial?
It changes all the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of areas have TIF districts.
Yeah. So just, I asked that for an education point for the board, that supervisor assessment labor is like venture capital. So on years where they're doing more, particularly commercial assessment, you may have more field labor costs, you may have more technology costs, but the return on investment is significant. So when we look at year over year on the supervisor assessment budget, that's the question we continually ask: where are you on assessment? Because if you fall behind on assessment, you're falling behind on possible property taxes.
And it's been real difficult the last year with the markets, residential and commercial, as far as
Yeah,
paying well over.
yeah,
Our quadrennial's gonna be busy.
yeah, yeah.
As you know, as a PTEL county, this is your lifeblood. If your value's not going up, you're limited in what you can increase that, so you have to have that. So it's a good thing to keep your finger on the pulse.
When you're squeezing, you can't always squeeze equally. I guess that's a bad metaphor.
All right, board of review, decrease, not an increase, so we like to see that, but. Okay, animal control. Going on, let's see those.
thing that we noticed on the revenue side is that many counties have a goal of the registration fees for canines. They'll set that fee to self-fund the department to a particular percentage. So quite often they'll say fees will be established so that the department funds 80% of its total operating cost. So your fees actually fund a very small portion of your total operating cost. So down the road, you may want to look at,
That was
and
actually
80%
done at our
is
last
very,
meeting.
I'm sorry?
The fees were discussed at our last meeting, and we basically tentatively agreed with the animal control person on what the fees should go to. He's talking to the counties around. He already got their rates, but he's talking to see if they're making changes also. And the next meeting, it'll be voted on, but those fees will be raised as of the first of the year.
And you can decide as a county how much you want to subsidize the animal control. The advantage of the registration fees is that means that the animal control program is funded by those people who have the animals rather than the property holders that in general. But very few counties do 100% because the fees then become, if they get too high, then people abandon the animals. So, but we did notice that your revenue is significantly lower than it probably should be.
Most of his revenue comes on the dog wash side.
Right, so
So
what
he uses
we
that
would
to pay
expect
his
is that a significant portion of the revenue would come from the registration fee.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's where he's in order with about half of them around him right now. And then some of them are much higher. They're either very similar or they're much higher.
The levels of service are significantly different from one county to another.
Yes, like I think it was Macon County is like 10 times as much as we are.
Yeah.
And then some were a little less, and yeah, there was a lot of variance. So we're looking at being somewhere like the counties that are around us. But anyhow, he's looking at an increase for the first of the year, and the committee's talked about it twice now, and he wanted to get some more information, but I'd say that'll be voted on next month to raise it. But it won't be, they're basically going to double, but double what we have is still not very much.
Right, and not to derail Dustin's meeting, but I do it all the time. On this line item, if the county is serving the municipal areas as well, and not just doing the unincorporated areas, if you're serving Shelbyville, then you can enter into an intergovernmental agreement with them to have them share expense.
We haven't.
So, but the price of that intergovernmental agreement has to be based off of the cost of operation. And when I look at your IGA, or I look at your revenue and think about your population, it doesn't look like all the math is here. So I would downrange, focus on animal control. You can probably take $40,000 out of your general fund by getting your fees and IGAs in a good balance.
How much does the city pay? I haven't seen that number.
But we also have, we also have an organization that does an amazing job in helping with animal control and adoption and everything. So that therefore in itself is a cost savings because you're not having the euthanasia costs that we used to have, et cetera. So, it's kind of a fine line there, but because they do a lot that, like I said, contributes that what you can't see.
And he doesn't have to buy any food. He gets donated enough food to
Yeah, I
take
think
care of it all.
you added that in, right?
Yeah, we've had a lot of concern from animal control departments about donated food, and it always has to match, or else you deal with dogs with bad diets and stomach issues and things like that. So a lot of the items that are avoided with having another organization like that to work with also helps you avoid statutory requirements, as a specific amount of the euthanasia cost has to go through fighting this and different items like that. So if you have another organization that can take that off your plate, that helps in multiple ways, including having to break off certain funds for different items. Control, population control and things like that are a statutory requirement of euthanasia and things like that. So it's nice to have different organizations like that, and handshake deals are common, but they're often scary for me because you just don't know what to expect moving forward. So if those exist and they're healthy, we encourage them, but we like to be able to anticipate what the future will bring. And if we need to advise on that, or if you need help, just let us know. Increasing costs of fees should be done in a way that it balances compliance with the actual driving the revenue. If you increase the fee too much, you're going to have less people that do it. It's not going to increase anything anyway. So defining the scope of what you want out of the animal control department is really important. So it's up to the board and the committee to work with the animal control officer to identify what is realistic. So it sounds like that's an operation. So, all right. Any questions about animal control?
The last year we received, or this year it worked, $21,621 from the city for animal control.
Does that go into a special fund, or does that come into
Goes into the general fund.
what do we have when we go up into the revenue filter?
And what other cities?
I don't know that we have any other cities.
I think we have some per call agreements with other municipalities, but I have to look and see what.
Okay, because he mentioned that everybody but one town in the county
Right.
had some kind of agreement with him,
But I believe they're per call.
but I haven't seen the agreement, so I didn't know.
That might be
I
all,
think
find out.
that's so much for population.
Is that-
or
That goes
That's
into,
correct.
scroll down a little bit. Keep going. It's near the end, I know. Well, it's about, I have to find out. We may put it under the city dispatching because it all comes as one check. And city dispatching goes back into the general fund as well.
All right, we'll verify that. Head down to animal control. All right, any questions about animal control? All right, let's move on. All right, EMA had a lot of ARPA requests. We have not been advised of any of them being approved. So if any of those come up again, we need to be communicated of that, but at this point, we did not include those in this. So we were able to hold EMA funds. Rescue Squad is one of those relationship building opportunities of I don't remember if it's the dive team guy typically goes into Jessica's office and just as a face-to-face discussion about budget. And so he didn't walk into my office in Bloomington, so I didn't get that until last minute. And when the draft was already out of, hey, I didn't get my increase. So we went back. This number has changed from 29,000 to 33,000, and then ultimately agreed back on 37 due to the inability to identify specifics on a request for an increase. The dive team has increased $2,000 a year, I believe, in expenses over the last few years. They've done that and grown the department. I'm a little more of a stickler and tell me, okay, what are you going to spend that money on? Tell me, how are you going to grow your department? How is this going to benefit the county? I need to know what next year is going to be different than this year, and then we'll grow that. Yes.
I'm on the committee there. Everything is going up.
Okay.
And when you look at, rescue is a $17,000 budget. Maintenance of equipment is going up rapidly. There's so many things that we don't have that we need.
Okay.
They do fundraisers and they try to do the best they can, but they all have full-time jobs too.
I understand.
A lot of the training used to be provided by companies. They would just, you know, you're dealing with us, we'll put on this training,
Right,
that training.
okay.
Now, there's fees on almost all of them. The maintenance part of the equipment is just every year going. And some of that equipment, every time it's used, it's got to be checked. And even now, we've got people that are inspecting their own dive tanks or licensed, they're qualified to do that. So they're doing everything they can to cut corners there and make things as cheap as possible. But there's some new equipment they're needing to start saving for, trying to find some way to acquire that money to be very definitely used. In my opinion, and listening to the expense is very easy to justify why that or even more to be raised, yeah.
So those are the conversations I need to have prior to this step.
Well,
Yes,
the rescue squad,
yes.
it's a voluntary organization. These guys have to have certain equipment and try to prepare for the future. If you may have a tractor or a combine, it could be anything like that to make sure, you know, they're always looking ahead, you know. With the new electric cars or the hybrids, it's the make, model, they're all different. And you're talking about electricity, and you're talking about people that are cutting into something to make sure that they're safe. So, I mean, these guys are on a minimal budget, very minute budget, and this is all volunteer from those people. They are an excellent organization. I've seen a lot of organizations in my life, but the dive team and the rescue squad, this county, or I'd put it against any other county. I mean, these guys are so dedicated, you know, and to bring their budgets down, you know, is,
And it's not going down. No.
yeah, but,
But
you know,
it's all, so.
I know that,
And
but,
it's not my job, it's these guys. These guys have the hard decision to make. I just put the number on the paper. So I have almost $40,000 in a volunteer. It's up to you guys whether you want to invest the taxpayers' dollars on this. And I 100% agree, if you don't have these guys to save lives, it could be an issue. But it's up to these guys to determine whether the tax dollars go to this or to this.
well, we have a lake out here, and I don't know if you've been aware, but the Shelbyville dive team, their work with Moultrie County, and also they work with Effingham County, and they have some other assistants. So if it may be a pond, if it may be fast water, it could be a lake or whatever, there's a lot of equipment, like what Gary was saying, that they have to invest in just to keep things safe, and then nobody wants to have where they can't recover their loved ones. Objects are different, but loved ones are totally, you know, you don't want to be out there for a week or something, and
You don't want an uneducated person out there trying to
Just a quick example, a few years ago, our school bus garage had a bus come off Jack's Dam, hit the man under it, and our restaurant did not have the equipment to lift the bus.
it's true.
We had lifts, but it was on concrete floor, and what we had wouldn't do the job without the fear of it falling. The men went out and raised the money to get the airbags, so we didn't get into that again. And now with the equipment, farm equipment's large, we're needing bigger airbags to handle some of the tractors and combines and things that come in.
So we did just have an increase in revenue due to the updated numbers in the farm. So obviously that is something we can still increase and stay in balance. So if the committee so chooses, we can have this $2,000 back in here and it won't unbalance it.
But now is the time.
Yes.
Got a question on the EMA gasoline down to 1,500. Are we going to get him an electric car, or are we? Is that shared with the zoning?
So this was the number that he proposed. I didn't personally cut that number, so I don't.
he cut that number?
This was the number that we received from the EMA.
I was in the EMA meeting yesterday, and he said that they cut his gasoline, so.
So while we were at the table, we told them that we wanted a balanced budget.
Okay,
And we looked at this and we said, okay, if you want an increase in this line, where is it gonna come from?
Right.
That was line.
okay.
So he used actuals, so we had the actual year to dates. We were looking at it, we said, is this possible?
Okay.
If you're driving less,
Right,
if you're not going to trainings, you're using online training, and you're not
Right.
driving as much, is this possible?
okay,
I mean, at that time he did, but,
okay.
I mean, if it's not possible, then we need to know. Like
Right.
Bruce said, now's the time.
Right.
So are we adding rescue squad dollars to increase that by $2,000? Is that what we're doing?
Are you talking about the very bottom line?
So rescue squad is the $17,000 he was talking about right here. So that would move to 18,000, is that right? I know you can't see from there, but
Was he asking for 2,000?
No, the
1,000
dive
for the
team
dive
has
team, and then
Oh,
who's
okay,
the
1,000
separate,
each way.
yeah, and then the rescue squad.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say
Dive team, rescue.
one on each would
Right.
be a tremendous help.
Okay. Is the committee in agreement that to do that?
I would be.
All right, let's continue. All right, 911 is holding flat at their levy, so that's the budgeted expenses there. So we would like an opportunity to discuss the sheriff's department a little bit at length. So we're going to get into the weeds a little bit on this, going to transition back to the PowerPoint then. Okay, so we'll do that when we get to the state's attorney's budget. All right, so the increase to the Shelby County Sheriff's Department is an increase of over $1 million. Again, bulk being labor items in a regular year, but obviously this is a contentious item and it is more than a regular year and the revenue for the Sheriff's Department. So an increase year to year of 100 and almost 50%. Or an increase, excuse me, increase of almost 50%. The total budget for the Sheriff's Department is $3,309,187. Can you give me the next slide? The breakdown on the increase here really tells that story of this is a labor increase. 70%, or just about 70%, is the labor increase. There's increases in the cost of prisoner food and medical. This is kind of an item that we'll continue to look at as cash bail goes away. We're going to monitor the amount of volume that's in jails. As the court system tries to get less people in jails, we're anticipating a decrease to this item, but it doesn't change any contract agreements that you have, so that there is some give and take in that, but we are anticipating, due to less prisoners in jail, less costs from the jail. Has that proven yet? We don't have any data to back that up because we haven't gotten into no cash bail yet, but it is something that we can kind of see down the road. To what degree, we don't know yet, but we are continuing to run numbers on that. There are increases to the sheriff's vehicle budget in regards to vehicle purchases, vehicle maintenance, and fuel, which is increasing the budget over $100,000. I know there's been staffing issues, so there's training. You're having to send deputies to the academy or new hires to the academy, and continuing certifications. Has an increase to the training budget of over $54,000. So the total increase increase to the sheriff's budget is $1,042,954. We do have some questions, if the sheriff doesn't mind, we'll put you on the spot here. When we run our numbers for the labor increase based on what the data that we got for the MOU, we come up $250,000 light of the numbers that you have. I believe, can you switch back? I believe the bulk, just no, the line item before that, or there. I think the bulk of that is in holiday overtime. I'm not sure how this number was come up with, and I am putting you on the spot here, but I don't know if you have anything prepared.
Tina actually said, so she overestimated that one, is that what you're saying?
That's
What I think she did was, instead of figuring out that their base pay that day would already be in the budget, she figured it out, like, if they were working, she said, she told me she realized her mistake was high on that number, so.
And then there's so many variables, as you know, on shift and who bills the holiday pay. So somewhere between 275 and 320 is what we think is overstated. I can send you those, what we got, but as you know, on overtime, there's so many factors that influence overtime and who fills the shift that it depends on how you see the assumptions and how we see the assumptions.
Right.
But it feels like the 275 is the most likely overstated. And going forward, since you've got the MOU, you've got new people, you have unfilled positions, I think we could anticipate that there would, even if we change the holiday down, I can see in the future, 6-month point going, well, the 275 should have come from here or apart. So transfers between your labor lines seem likely, but for now it seems like holiday specifically is about 275 overstated. Sure.
And it is lots higher in this current year because they were running about a third staff, so there was lots of overtime. I think it showed 9 months we had $460,000 this year.
Yeah.
Compared to what you see on our list of the other 2 years were like 150.
Right.
So
And
it's
That's
been
ARPA,
way
that's
up.
all
but-
ARPA.
but
Well,
All
so-
the ARPA was categorized to holiday and overtime.
This holiday overtime.
So
So-
that large increase is the ARPA spending
Oh,
from
all
the
the
MOU.
ARPA money is in the holiday and overtime. That's what drove it to 460.
Yeah,
So we really didn't have a big increase in overtime.
I mean, we may have had some, we'd have to go back and
Okay.
narrow it down, which I talked about in open meetings, because when we passed the MOU, we didn't have a line item for ARPA. So we had to tie it to a pay line item that we already had, so we tied them all to holiday and overtime. I have a question, President.
So again, a baseline year. The MOU complicated things. So best guess is where we're at.
So does the MOU need to go somewhere else then? Because if you are
So-
looking
Already got
to
it all
there and you
tied there.
lower it.
So how you did it in 2022 is not how we've done it in 2023.
Okay, it's gonna change, okay.
Right,
That's fine.
so it'll be transfers in, that'll be transferred into the general fund, and then the payroll is the payroll based off of the MOU.
So we're
That's
actually
what we-
looking for a holiday and overtime amount.
Right, so it doesn't, in the background, ARPA looks at it from that perspective, but from a payroll, it's the hours submitted according to your contractual agreement. It's,
But it's still gonna show up in that line item
for,
for 23. Because all those pay types are already in the payroll system, and every pay type has to be tied to a line item. And those pay types are already all tied to that line item.
well, we can take one more cut of making sure that we have the line item aligned for that. What I'm comfortable with is that it's 275 overstated. How it gets aligned to the line item, we can work with that.
Estimate on the revenue, did we have, I can't remember if we added state's supposed to reimburse for the sheriffs. Is that, you remember what that number was?
Off the top of my head.
2/3 of whatever the compensation.
Yeah, which half of the year's gonna be the lower amount and then higher. I just calculated that right around 67,725. So he's not gonna get the full 115 until December. So I have that estimated revenue at 67,725.
Yeah, let's go ahead and change it. Be a benefit to change
And I
your
may have
fiscal year.
submitted it.
So the last two things on the sheriff, do you have cars ordered, Sheriff?
I do, not yet.
Okay, so,
I don't know as I have the money for them yet, so I didn't want to order them yet.
well, great process, that's it,
Okay, yeah.
we like that. The cars that have been ordered, we've been hearing from counties where the original stated price of the car got increased by 20 grand for delivery, so, so we're watching that pretty close. It's budget busters on just a shortage of cars and shortage of.
So this isn't, obviously, if we lower the holiday pay for the sheriff, this number that was provided was in the calculation for the ARPA revenue. So if we decrease that to our 275, that also decreases the amount of ARPA you're using to fund the general fund. So that's not gonna go into your deficit versus revenues. So as the sheriff's labor goes down, the amount of available ARPA goes up, not the amount of available funds in the general fund, if that makes sense. So as expenses are pushed down in this instance, revenues are pushed down too. So that will level out. That being said, $50,000 of the courthouse MOU is about the number that is costing the general fund in the increase to the courthouse. So if the board determines that the MOU is going to be funded through ARPA, that number would go into that ARPA revenue into the general fund. So that's yet to be determined, as I understand it. So Sheriff, that doesn't scare you was that overestimated to that extent, or do you?
That I can't answer here. Yeah, that seems awful high. I think so, yeah.
Well, maybe see if she can rework that number.
Yeah, I think
Maybe it's kind of an accurate number.
I would like to see those numbers come closer together.
See if she rework that number a little bit.
Let's come back to that then.
The next one.
I guess. Mayor Commission has a small increase. Thank you, go County Coroner.
We're just talking here, we really thought at the board meeting that we passed the resolution to use ARPA for the ASME employees and
Okay.
the non-union employees, which was passed last month.
You did.
You did.
Okay.
I didn't. So let's go ahead and add $50,000 to the revenue, or all. The data, Chris kind of looked at it. So I'll adjust that revenue. It's right around 50,000 to the general fund. There is a portion that goes to the highway department, but the highway employees are not paid out of the general fund. So I'll give them a more specific number and put that push in there as well. See, here's the coroner. The coroner has actually reduced budget by 4,000. Any questions for the coroner or about the coroner's budget? Okay, keep going. The judge's budgets, as we discussed before, this is, in her opinion, a reserved increase. Any questions about the judge's request? Okay, public defender. Increased to 181,000. I know the increase to the state's attorney was 3%, and that's the office holder for the public defender is based off of the state's attorney, so as they go up, so do they. Okay, courthouse security staying flat.
Is there a court security revenue stream from the circuit clerk? Circuit clerk here?
She's not here. Where is it? Is it up in the revenue list?
Yeah.
It should be.
Comes out of one of her
It's a
fees.
fee or fine, but yeah, it's its own separate fund.
Circuit clerk. Get affected by the increases to the labor. So the individual discussions we have get into the weeds on office supplies and whether these are temporary. So moving forward, we'll continue to have these conversations on, okay, are you buying computers this year? Are you rotating computers on a 3-year basis? What's your plan to control expenses on those? So we do get into these conversations directly with department heads through the conversations through packets and then in-person meetings. Any questions about the circuit clerk's budget? State's attorney. Alright, so here's our other item that I want to focus on today is the request from the state's attorney about the need of additional labor in her office. So there's multiple needs in the county for additional labor. It's up to the board to determine where to invest that money. I don't know if it was your last board meeting, but I know Bruce came in and discussed the opportunity of a finance officer or an auditor or assigning duties of an auditor to an employee that can specifically track process of finances and payroll and things like that to create consistency and correct some processes. So that is a mirrored position for me of what it's going to cost. The cost of an additional assistant state's attorney is about the cost of a finance officer and a contract to support that officer of what they should be doing, of a mentor. So that's kind of our question for the committee, and where are you looking to invest? Is which direction would you like to see this go? I believe it's $70,000 of finance officer or additional aid into the state's attorney's budget. She made a very strong case in her meeting of meeting that. I don't know how permanent that is. Hopefully it's not permanent, but again, you guys are kind of in the hot seat on this one. You make the hard decision. But I see the need as a finance officer really helping out the county. But I kind of want to open it up to hear your thoughts on the issue.
I have a question for you on that. If we get a finance officer, how much time will that relieve off of your office? I mean, half a person, more than that, less than
It
that?
could also be the FOIA officer.
And yes, and the same thing like on the cash bail, how do you think that's going to affect your office?
I don't think the cash bail will affect my office much because we're going to be charging the same number of cases.
Yeah.
Whether or not they're in jail pre-trial or out of jail pre-trial is not going to make a difference to us. I anticipate we are going to be increasing criminal filings once the city gets their dog, their canine. Hopefully the sheriff's department's going to get a canine. Hopefully the sheriff's department's going to get fully staffed again where we have the deputy on the task force, and that's going to greatly increase the drug cases that are going to be coming through here. So I think on the criminal side it will be increasing. It depends what the duties of the financial officer are. If they can handle FOIA, would they be doing in addition to GATA, hopefully?
I wonder, could they do GATA?
Once it's defined, it's just a matter of training that person to do it.
Okay.
If it's not a statutorily controlled role that has, we can't make them an engineer, we can't make them an attorney, but we can make them FOIA, we can make them
Things on
GATA,
the
we can
accounting
make them.
side.
It's just a matter of getting the right person and providing the right training.
What role would they have in payroll? And we get labor issues, that's a lot of our
So
work now.
there are 9 functions of an auditor listed in the statute, and they don't, and we'll just stay with the auditor part of it. They don't replace the treasurer's role in doing audit. They monitor the process. So, and if you think about the last 2 weeks, there's been process issues where a submission didn't have all the supporting documentation. That would go to the auditor would resolve it.
So the auditor would resolve it instead of her office?
Right, so it becomes the person, and it needs to be critical, you've got 29 problems in Shelby County, it becomes the person who's working each of those 29 problems and reporting to the board, and working with whatever department head. The alternative is us, and we're too expensive for you to have us on board.
I
We've
would
got
probably,
enough work for that person. I feel we have enough work for that person, that internal auditor. I think he would save us half his salary in what our audit expense is. It's like tripled in.
If your auditor is charging you prelim, where they come in and arrange your books before they audit it, then yeah. Now,
I don't know what they're doing, I just know it's
The
went from
reason
40 to
audit expense
150.
went up so much is because Weston Company charged us in this new fiscal year. They charged us for 2 circuit clerk's office in this new fiscal year. We had to pay John Vanderberg in this fiscal year, in addition to the work that Whipfleet has done up to date. That is why our audit expense has went up so much in 2022. And in terms of FOIA, I answer my department's FOIA requests. I know, well, previously the former county highway engineer answered his FOIA request.
Right.
So they go down in 2023 then?
It should go down in 2023, depending on what action the board takes regarding the overpayment, underpayment, detailed in the forensic audit. So I don't know what their plans are for that. So probably right now it should stay at $150,000.
And I agree, we don't know. We need this leader, I'd say, for that also.
for
This internal auditor, I think, is going to surely be able to give us some direction, or we're going to have to hire an outsider, but either way, that's going to dip into that money real heavy.
so there's,
The
you should
internal
set the
auditor
expectation
can't do
that
it.
if you go to an accountant and you want to hire a top drawer accountant, you're not going to get it for $70,000.
No.
So what you want is someone who has great attention to detail, has the ability to follow process. I like tax people that do that. I like bookkeeping people to do that. And then when they need help, then they come to the board and say, this over-under payment, I remember you talking about that at the last. The external auditor said there was a number of variables that had to be considered on even how you do the math. I wouldn't expect that person, or frankly, anybody in the county now to be able to do that.
No, somebody's going to
So-
have to hire somebody and decide who.
That
to hire.
person would come to you and say, this is what we need to do. I have these 3 vendors who can do it. This is what they want to get paid.
Right, I wouldn't
You
expect
can't
him to
make
do
them,
it,
you
but
can't
he
expect
needs
them to be
to
the Superman.
No.
What you can expect them to be is the person that you turn to and say, this went wrong in the process, go find out why. Go design a new process to do that. So you've got a host of those. And nobody to turn to say, go do that.
Correct. That's how I feel.
That's what we're proposing. It's not that we don't believe the state's attorney has a burden, because clearly they do. But when you look at the totality of Shelby County, that's where we looked at of how do you make tomorrow different for Shelby County?
so as far as the budget goes, is it basically a choice between another assistant state's attorney or a county auditor?
We feel it is.
I think the money would be better served with the county auditor.
Good for you. Good for you. Knowing everything that you said about cashless bail and drugs, interdiction, and crime, you're exactly right. Your load is going to increase, but I think that's a noble, and we agree fully. If, no exaggeration, you've got 29 issues that are unmanaged, and they come up in your agenda, and you talk about them, and then they remain unmanaged. And
Well, and I'm fortunate, the assistant in my office has 30 years of experience, so between the two of us, we can handle a heavier load with the crime. It's this outside things that are occurring that are time suckers, that takes us away from the criminal cases.
Yeah.
So a county auditor would certainly help us, and I think the money would be better spent.
And I'll tell you, it takes 12 to 18 months for us to hire and train. Jake's the example. So this is Jake's training for the next year and a half. And then Jake will be able to do dust. So you should have that same expectation that whoever you hire won't know FOIA. They won't know GOTA. They won't know process, and will have to have somebody to mentor along. There are people who can do that. And I sent to Brian an unpriced proposal that said, you can't afford us to be your administrators, but we might be able to come up with a contract where we can mentor this person going forward, and then provide the ability of the board to ask us questions. So right now, and I joked this morning, I take questions from Erica. So we can formalize that, but this is not, we never sell ourselves in the budget. You're paying us to do your budget right now. Our budget advice is the county auditor is a better investment. And Jefferson calls him, Hyatt calls him the finance manager. Jefferson calls him the county board assistant. So you'd have to decide what you want to call him. That's our recommendation. Now, the way this would work is, if you agree with this, then we will align the draft budget to that, and it would be in the draft budget that the committee presents to the board for approval. The budget gets approved, and then it's the whole process of candidate search and interviews. So all you're doing is creating a line item to charge against in the future.
Until you get to that point, is it possible for you to hire outside attorneys to help, or, because this isn't going to change overnight with your load, or you delay your load and leave them in jail, or what do you do?
Well, we can't keep them in jail if they're demanding trial. They have 120 days to get to trial if they demand.
Okay.
And if they're out of custody, they can demand, and we have 160 days to get them to trial.
Well, the auditors here take some of your load away. What do you do to take care of your cases? What do you recommend there?
If it is possible to possibly finance a part-time attorney to handle the outside issues, we're fine with criminal if we don't have these outside issues. The labor relations issues, some of the county board issues that happen, the FOIA, because we answer our own FOIAs, and then other departments ask for our advice before they respond. Some of them, it's time consuming. If that is a possibility while a county auditor is being trained, I think we'd be fine.
How much does that cost?
I guess it would be, we could do it on an hourly basis, depending on what the needs are. But I would think it'd be half of what an assistant would cost, and there wouldn't be the benefits. You have a full-time employee.
I'd be in favor of 35 or 40 for that person to help them out until we can get somebody hired and trained to take away some of that load, because the extra load they're doing isn't going to go away. It's got to be done until somebody else can take it over.
Well, and we have, in terms of years of prison sentences, compared to the last administration, we're triple and quadruple what they were doing if you compare year to year. Compare the last 4 years of the prior administration. That's not, these defendants are not coming in and getting good deals and pleading the first time. We're offering heavy sentences. That takes a long time to get it through the system. There's pretrial motions. A lot of times they're going to go to trial. So it's labor intensive as far as what criminal goes. It's more than what the prior administration was dealing with.
What do the rest of you guys think? Make some comments.
I think that makes sense to me.
So general county budget 70,000 and then 30,000 into the state's attorney's budget to help fund. All right. So I believe we increased farm by an additional 80. We've already used 2 of that, so there is, I believe, that expense.
And I would think if the 30 or whatever is approved, once that auditor is fully trained, we could drop that. So it'd be a 1-year thing.
So I think it's like anything else, we're creating a line item to charge a future decision against, but there are steps that we still need to go through. We need to think this all the way through. But right now, we want you to have a line item to charge to in the future if you decide to do that. So if the committee wants to have a line item for the, and it's part-time help, then you can put whatever dollar amount you want in there, and you should do that in absence of spending the farm money, because there's still current farm money. But remember, at the very beginning, Jake had the ability to show you what your expenses are, what your revenues are. You had a positive or negative number. As we finish this, we'll come back to that, and it'll have a positive or negative number. So if the committee wants, I would put the $30,000 in for part-time labor and the 70,000 for the county auditor. Although I would suggest we find a different name for it, because I kind of like finance manager, but there's also county board assistant that works very well.
No, I think finance management.
And there are models in other counties where that person interacts with the office holders across the board, whether it's, you may do your own FOIA, but they may maintain the log of the FOIA request, and on this date, the message was sent on this day.
Does that part-time help require the board to?
I think there's a process that you have to go through to approve the position, and then set the parameters, and there's parameters on whether or not it's an outside contracted service or a assistant state's attorney. I think Perry County has got a great example of that, if you're looking for an example on contracts. But it essentially, and using Perry County as the example, they've got a part-time state's attorney that comes in a half day, 2 days a week.
Which county is that?
Perry.
Oh, okay.
And it's been 2 years since I've been down there, so I don't know if they've made changes, but that's a lot.
I think that's a good plan, and if the board did approve that part-time assistant, it could be for 1 year, we could put that in.
Yeah, you can re-examine it, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
What was your thought process when you suggested this financial officer? Who did you think was going to build their role, or how did you see that?
You're hiring new, unless, you can open the position, you've got talented people in the county, you could open the position to somebody who has that skill set, move them in, and then backfill that position.
Sure.
But it really is, if they have an attention to detail, have any kind of detailed reporting background, whether it's bookkeeping or tax. We've hired a bunch of people that were H&R Block tax people who nicely don't get paid a whole lot of money, so they're pretty easy to hire away. But then, that's the raw material. Then you teach them how to use Microsoft Excel. Then you teach them the FOIA process. Then you teach them the GATA process. But out of your 29 list of problems, you're going to need to prioritize where do you want this person to start.
I guess I was curious, does the county board build somewhere within the county board build the expected job description for that person, or who really?
So we can
how do you
absolutely
feel about
provide
this?
you a draft of a job description.
So they know what the roles are that they're applying
Yeah.
to do.
Because it's very clear that you don't want to hire somebody who starts putting on the stripes of the office holder and comes in and says, I'm the big dog and now you're gonna play by my game. That's not how it works. It's, here's the problem and I need to partner with you to
Yes.
identify partners. Skill sets, we hire first for how well you can interact. Secondly, by what your skill sets are, because I can train you to do anything.
And you do offer the service to help train this person? If
Yeah,
you
I mean,
want that
we'll,
service?
again, I try to keep separate our sales
Right,
process from your
separate.
budget process, but I think that we can be of help. This may be the least expensive way for us to help you, is to virtually guide somebody who does the most expensive thing we do is show up like this. Just to let you know, there's 11,000 line items.
Should we have a motion on this? Currently have
So,
either
so this
position?
is a workshop on the budget, so you don't need a motion.
Okay,
You're just changing the
we
draft.
can change it in there, okay?
But finally, what you will do is then propose the draft to go to the board for them to place on public viewing. So that's why this is called a work session,
Okay.
so you can tweak along the way. You're way behind, I don't know what your problem is.
Might be us holding him up a little.
Yeah, someone keeps interrupting me.
It's not working like that.
All right, probation.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Going back, under courthouse security, have we done anything for the security people as far as COVID recognition? I've had a couple inquiries as to why they're the only ones that have been left out.
Well, they're part-time for one thing.
Yeah, I know, but being I've been asked a question, I just want the question out. We can ignore it or we can give some thought to it.
So I would say that's a board issue rather than a budget issue.
Okay.
Because you passed an MOU for non-union employees, and as I recall, it didn't define between full-time and part-time. So I don't know what your,
No, I think it does say full-time on
Does
that.
it?
Is that-
That's, okay.
Yeah, non-union employees.
Okay. Any questions about probation? Primarily set by the court system, but it is a relatively reserved increase from what I've seen from probation across the state. I've flinched a few times between probation budgets this year, but this is actually one of the more reserved that I've seen. Any questions regarding probation? All right. Transportation. Transportation request is a reduced request of $1,250. County Planning Commission. Question about that? Absolutely.
Rural transportation, what made it drastically go down over the last, from 21 to 23?
I'm not seeing any requests for mileage. It doesn't look like they're charging for their telephone, so I don't know if they're billing that differently. I see a significant difference in the office holder. So,
That's when Jared was PCOM and had the role of PCOM. That was one of his 3 part-time jobs.
Oh, so that was where part of his salary laid, is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes.
Alright,
so he's paid from a different area.
that's all I was curious.
Thank you. Good, all right. Zoning Board of Appeals. Again, increase to people. Our final section is of zoning administration. A reserve increase. $500 for office supplies, as everything costs more. Postage has gone up, stamps are more expensive. Publishing is more expensive. correct. So that is the general fund. This is where I spend the majority of my time. This is where the levy is typically sees the most drastic change based on these. We have a lot of discussion with department heads on what are you doing with your special funds? What kind of reserve do you hold in there? How do we lighten the load on the general fund to lighten the load on the taxpayer? So we have these discussions and we get into the weeds on the special funds and identifying statutorily appropriate expenses for the document storage funds, drug funds and things like that with the department heads. But the majority of my time is how are we going to make this general fund balance? So I think we've done a pretty good job of that this year, and I appreciate all the work from the department heads. Speaking of work with department heads, did you get any word back from your?
I did.
What'd you?
I asked her to refigure it, and she came up with just a little shy of 400,000, 399,940. My only question, or where I'm confused at, is does it need to be, if that's the line where the ARPA's coming from for premium pay, does it need to be higher? Because you're gonna continue to, that's the line you've got it attached to?
That's
or-
what it's attached to, and I'd really rather not change it considering we report to the federal government.
Right, so that's where, if it's gonna continue, a part of their salaries are gonna come out of that line, does it need to be, in essence, artificially higher?
So then do we need to reduce the actual salary lines down then?
It shouldn't be in the salary line because it's not a part of their base pay. The ARPA has a whole different pay type that comes out of a different item on the budget.
So when you figured the labor items for correctional officers up here and the deputies, was it included here and here? Or
I don't
did she-
think so. I think when we turned in our budget submission, we included it in there, but I think, if I remember correctly, we had a number in parentheses, what we thought would have been the ARPA amount for this coming fiscal year.
You click on the shared packet. Are you talking about the handwritten one? This is the one I received an email. I don't see it.
Yeah, I think it was on the front page of the day we actually met downstairs. We had a,
I think there's one written on here.
right, because I think it seemed like it was like, what we estimate is 279,000 of that would have been what we needed for ARPA for the premium pay and the bonuses that would be on this year.
So they refigured, and she came up with 400, but there's concern over the way it's being processed.
Well, then, let's table that department until you've got a few days to work with their resource and land on numbers that you feel good about.
So again, this pushes, as the expense goes down, the revenue for ARPA goes down. So the balancing of the budget isn't affected by this, but the amount of available ARPA after you invest in this MOU significantly changes due to this conversation. So we'll, as you say, we'll continue to work with the sheriff and the secretary to identify what number both the revenue and the expense are set on that one. We'll come up with a new one. That's a good walkthrough on the general fund. I appreciate your time. I do want to briefly, I do have time scheduled with Jessica. We're gonna get in the weeds on the levy. I do want to have a preliminary discussion of what we're looking at for levy. Yeah, go back to my. So our levy strategy is done through spreadsheets before we get into ordinance. So you'll get a levy strategy sheet that looks like this, that shows what a budget request was, what the figure that we're going to put towards the rates, and then we'll calculate the actual extension. We calculate, your P-TEL calculation will go in here when you're under 5%. Your previous extensions go up here, which is you cannot exceed 5% of your previous extension, so that math goes in there. We calculate your growth rate based on previous year EAVs, so we include EAV growth into your strategy, and then we put those into where they accumulate and come into the extension. So we'll work with the clerk to continue to identify how to best invest in this. So my reason for pointing this out is that this year it's a uncharacteristic increase to your tax numbers. So as P-TEL, you're typically going to get half the increase that what you got this year. So moving forward, the increase that you're going to experience this year, so we have to maximize what we can do with the 5% this year, because you're only going to get 2% next year. So we'll help you maximize your investments into specific funds as you levy into these. As you levy for a specific criteria, statutorily you have to stay within that criteria once those dollars are levied for that. So we'll help you identify to make sure that those are maximized and stay within your maximum rates. We do have the maximum rates here to identify any issues that you'll run into. We do get into different calculations in other counties with the tort fund and things like that, investing into the state's attorney's fund with that. But as you're a P-TEL county, that limits the cap on the general fund. So typically your general fund is capped, but since you're P-TEL, you don't have a cap on your general fund, which makes the game of pushing it into different levies for different investments less important. So we will help you identify the best way to invest these, and we'll work with the clerk to come up with a levy strategy document. I would like you to get this approved at the same time as your budget, as they come hand in hand. They're not obviously the same process. They're different processes, but money is money, and we kind of need to get a handle on one goes along with the other. So we're gonna have this discussion. I don't want it to be the first time that you see it when it comes across when you're voting on it. So this is what this is gonna look like. You'll see this as well as an ordinance that has it just basically, here's what you're gonna levy, but it's harder to understand. What are these numbers? What are we levying? This is where that comes from. Any questions? All right, any questions on the budget as a whole? Any concerns?
Can we just hit on the bottom right there? So as Dustin's saying, if you've got a 5% opportunity, you take the 5% opportunity to cover your expenses. As he works the rest of the budget, you see the yellow boxes down there, what the cap is and remaining. That number will shift up and down based off of all the rest of the spreadsheet activities. So anything that's remaining, then it's typically a decision on where's the best place to put those remaining dollars. So in speaking with the treasurer this morning, your IMRF reserve is pretty solid, your healthcare reserve is pretty solid, your FICA reserve is okay. I'd like it to be a little bit more, and the goal there is on those accounts, if you have 50% of your annual demand in reserve, then you're in pretty good shape. So once we look at those numbers, then the remaining can still go into that contingency that we talked about for the board, but the contingency has a cap on it as a percentage of the total levy for general fund. So when, and I don't want you to start spending $169,000 because that number is going to change based off the decisions you made today. But whatever's left there, we're going to look at the best pockets to put it into.
We have to identify Social Security reserve. We have to identify the unemployment reserve. We have to understand why only $50 is levied here. I know an early discussion was that the reserve was sufficient to fund that, but how long is that reserve?
It's not. toward the tail end of that.
Right, so that's why I don't get into the weeds on that 160, because it already could be spoken for. So. But we are gonna workshop this, and this will continue to develop before it comes across your desk. Okay, all right, turn it back over to you.
Okay. Yes.
So just to talk about process. So we've completed the workshop now. The edits that you saw Jake make will be produced into a new draft. Then the purpose of the committee is to present the draft to the board on the 11th for them to place it on public viewing. And it stays on public viewing, and I think the tentative date is the 30th for a special meeting.
Every 15 days.
Yeah, so I think that's the 30th. But, and then you'll have a special meeting the end of the month to approve it. In between now and that special meeting, as we uncover more details in the sheriff, we uncover more things about the sheriff, the levies, changes will be made to this draft. So at the special meeting at the end of August, the first thing you'll do is approve the amendments to the draft, and then approve the final budget. So there's still 24 days yet for us to work on this. Right up until the last day, we'll be working on it. But at that special meeting, you'll have this draft, a list of recommended amendments, and then approve the final.
So we would be voting to approve this draft today.
To pass to the full board
Yes.
for public, to place on public view,
Right, okay.
which is to be posted in the clerk's office. It's the only public viewing you're required to do, is to have a copy
It will
available.
be this one, but you can still make the changes with the sheriff.
As we're
and
going,
anything else that comes
you're
up.
making amendments to the draft that then are approved before the final.
And those can be approved, and those do not have to be out to the public? Those
No, you
amendments?
can make amendments to the
Like for the
budget
next
that's in
2
public
weeks.
viewing up to the approval date, so long as the amendments are listed in that agenda and are voted on individually.
But what's the view will be what you've got right now.
Cleaned up, yeah.
Yeah, but the view won't change is what I'm getting at.
No. Once we issue one for public viewing, then, because you assume that you're going to get public comment also. And they'll
Right.
say, I think you should think about line item 5. And then we think about line item 5 and we say, yes, we're going to change it. No, we're not going to change it. And
Any
then
department can still come back over those next 2 weeks and,
in the first year, in the second year, we'll just call you names if you do that.
okay.
Yeah.
So it gets so much easier in the second year because we'll have the baseline, and then we come back in the next year and go, tell me what's different this year than last year.
Yes.
And it gets much
Yeah, that does make sense. Can you go back to the screen that's got our current total with what we've changed this morning? To see just what's changed here before the sheriff's changes? Because actually the changes he's making, you're gonna be changing, it sounds like ARPA and that both, it's not really gonna change.
Yeah, I think over the
bottom line.
next couple of days, they'll tighten up the sheriff's numbers a little bit, and you'll get a new draft. We'll email you a new draft.
That number got much better today.
Well, I think overall, we know it's gonna be lower, but we don't know exactly what the number is.
Right.
I think that's safe to say. It's
Yes.
lower, we just don't know what.
571 more than likely.
So your balanced budget so far. Can you, Jake, can you
So I
get to
need a
that,
motion to present it then.
to the ARPA budget page? Up a little bit. Is that all? All right, now you're right. Can you get it? Okay, so even this has changed since yesterday, or since this draft went in. So this is your ARPA budget. So you've got 2022 the amount of money that came in, the decisions that you made in 2022, you see that column, the 420 that you allocated for FOP, the 49 that you allocated for AFSCME and non-union, that's for this fiscal year. You had 30,000 worth of capital improvements, and then administration is our contract. So you spent 519,000 in this fiscal year. You have 2023, you'll carry that over, plus you will gain funds, and then there on the bottom right, these things are critical. You are out of allocated funds for FOP. So you're going to run out of money. You need a board action to add more money to that.
I
So,
think we already discussed that.
so it looks like it needs to happen on the 11th.
Is that for this fiscal
I
year?
think,
For this fiscal year,
it's
for
going to come out of
2022?
general fund.
To,
Because there was things came out of ARPA earlier, base salaries came out of ARPA, and I think we made the decision that was going to come out of general funds.
to
That
make
was
up
never,
this year?
that's never been discussed publicly, and we've already taken
It
it out
wasn't
of
at the
ARPA,
last
and we've
meeting?
already allotted it. So I don't know how we can turn around and change that. All we did was we stopped taking their base
We stopped
pay.
taking it
That's
out.
all we did. Money's already been allotted there.
I'm
But he
confused
said we're
why
going to use
the,
all the allotment.
I'm also confused with why the 23 ARPA amount is so high.
Because it's clouded by the high numbers that are in your budget, so that's going to change.
Okay, and because we estimated that, I thought the amount of ARPA was much less this year than it was last year, because last year was the bonus
Hey,
for the,
right.
yeah.
So that number that's currently there covered the gap in the current draft budget that's in the rest. So when that changes, Dustin referred to this a few times, that it doesn't change the outcome, it changes the transfer for ARPA. So that number will change as we correct your numbers. So I wanted just to talk about this because there's, however you're finishing out 2022, you've got 2023 right around the corner. You need to take action to allocate whatever the funds are, and we'll work quickly to get that number and can provide a draft resolution. And then additionally, at the last building committee, you talked about capital improvements. And I would suggest that you do a board action to put a not to exceed amount for the capital improvements, and the advantage of that, you can allocate 1.2 million for the courthouse capital improvements as a not to exceed. If you don't use it, you don't use it. But it sounded like when we listened to all the projects, it sounded like you were going to get pretty damn close to that. So the expectation is you're going to get a new draft with today's edits, and then which will include tightening up the sheriff's numbers. And then on the 11th, the committee presents that to the board. They place it on public viewing. Public viewing consists of a printed copy being available in the clerk's office. Then 15 days later, we'll vote on it. And then the last thing, and this is almost like scolding you. Next year, hit us, email us, phone calls. Some of you called, some of you emailed me, but there's a lot of board members we heard nothing from. So next year, we've got to have that feedback of, I don't think Rescue's got enough money. I don't think, I'm preaching the choir because I think several of you here emailed me and phoned me, so, but we've got to get board participation in this.
But none of us will be on board next year.
None of you? I'll miss you.
Yeah.
All right.
So do we need to make a motion to present this draft on the 11th or not?
Committee needs to make a motion to present the draft as amended to the board on the 11th. Draft as amended.
Okay, Barb makes the motion, I need a second on that. David's got a second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. It looks to me like we're down to adjournment. You want to make that motion? Larry makes the motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor? Okay.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. We learned a lot. You learned a lot.
It was relatively